Hello. It's been a minute, but I wanted to share my experience from Vipassana, this last one that I went to. There's a lot that emerged there. So, in summary, there were three big things that happened. One was I got all the insights and downloads, reflections, one liners that came into the trailer for the second season. Realization of the recap for season one that I've released. The next was an upgrade of the Sushumna clearing. And there were two major changes that occurred there. I've seen quite a bit more healing capacity as a result of that shift. And the third thing that I discovered that was on day 9 of 10 and the most jarring and what I've been moving through since the last week and a half. I was shown the details, at least some of the details of the sexual trauma that I endured as a child that really shook my foundation. I'm going to share what transpired. So let me start with a couple of things that happened with Vipassana in the last ones I've been to, and I think this is the eighth one I've been to. Usually I get to day 5, 6, 7, 8 even, for my higher self and guide to really kick in. This time on day 2 of 10, it kicked in. So in that group hall, my hands started moving and I started activating all the 7 chakras. When I was in my room and in the pagoda cell, what they also started to do was something they'd done in the past, my guides. They created spheres of light in my hands and then would send it to each chakra. So I noticed that was happening throughout Vipassana multiple times. Day 2 was January 16th. So as I mentioned in a previous video, for those that are tuned in, David Clemens talks about this, a membrane that closed around the Earth on January 16th. And it's part of this grand experiment that's being run on the planet with a number of star nations, consciousness for humanity, where a lot of the elements of the star nations are in the human seed. There's waves of light coming through, igniting, metamorphosing into new human species that are all about building the new world, stepping into higher frequency, where we can tune into energy, care about the collective, ending of the Kali Yuga, beginning of the golden era. So on January 16th, what he talks about is the closing of a membrane, a bubble, around the Earth, where the frequency starts to more rapidly rise. But previously, what's been happening for the 5, 6 years, it'll rise and stabilize, rise, stabilize. So COVID, for example, was one of those times to allow it to stabilize because it was so disruptive. Now it's just going to continuously rise. And what that means is that as the frequency rises, all the lower frequency things, trauma, conditioning, beliefs that are low vibration, low frequency, are going to come to the surface. And that, as I've learned myself, means that our darkness and our trauma comes right up. The excruciating nerve pain I felt was part of that. And the significant, really deeply disturbing trauma that I discovered was part of that. That's going to happen at mass across the planet. So over the course of this year, it's going to get really dark in the collective 3D. And so the invitation and the opportunity is that as things come up, transmute, release that energy or that darkness or that trauma or whatever from the system and step into the higher frequency. Otherwise, it'll just continue to increase and amplify until you have to leave the planet because it can't sustain lower frequencies anymore. So eventually the third dimension is going to dissolve, is what he's saying, and we're going to move into the fifth, sixth, even maybe seventh dimension. So feel free to tune into David Clemens if you'd like. Okay, so anyway, it closed on the 16th, and on that day, I started experiencing shifts and energy being sent to my system. So that was really quite powerful. And then on January 18th, which was 2 days later, in the middle of the night, and I'd heard from the astrologer that I worked with over the last year, that was a pretty significant event where she predicted that I was going to become more aligned with my essence or my higher self. And it was like the third in a Mars-Neptune sequence of events occurring where there's more mind-body connection, deepening of that, part of the ascension process. Anyway, on January 18th, what I experienced was early in the morning, I was woken and I suddenly felt really strong energy in my system, my higher self, very activated. And then I started feeling that same feeling I get when I was in Peru and other times when I experienced singularity, everything collapsing into oneness. So as I'm lying in bed, I wake up and I suddenly start going into the depth of stillness, powerful energy. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And then I heard my higher self say, hey, you should get up for this, deepening the stillness. And what I believe, I started feeling this activation right here in my sacred heart. And then I heard my higher self say, would you like to set up for your awakening? And I just started laughing, literally out loud. And I sat up. And then I thought, wow, I wonder if this is part of the activation as the frequency rises, ignitions and activations occurring. So I thought maybe that's just more of an activation, more deeper connection with my higher self. And when I came out of my room, there was a deer right outside my door that then got nervous and sped off. And it was the most beautiful sunrise I've ever seen when I went to Vipassana. Stunning. Streaks of pink and clouds across the sky. I thought it was just a cool celebration of the shifts that are happening and occurring across the planet. Then I started getting insights. And one of these, they were taking me through a reflection of what I'd been through over the course of the year. And that's when they sparked the idea of you hit a perfect season finale for the show. And now at the beginning of season 2, and they even showed me what kind of things are going to be happening and what would have popped into the trailer. And then what they were essentially then taking me through was development of that trailer and the recap of the year and all the things that I learned. And they would show me scenes of things that I learned in my memory. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night or early in the morning and have a line for the trailer. It was really beautiful and moving. And it took me to tears when I realized how much I'd moved through and how many gifts, how much awe I felt of the journey. And that day, this was around day 5 or 6, I think, I was walking back from breakfast, I think. And I suddenly heard someone running. And I turned to look, and it was the 2 deers that were running, playing with each other. And as soon as they made eye contact, they both stopped. We were both just frozen there, looking at each other. And I thought, I don't really want to disrupt them. So I just kept walking, and then they continued doing their thing. And suddenly the thought that came into my mind was, I was the observer in the scene, and it suddenly changed their trajectory, right? They suddenly stopped what they were doing and altered course. So that, just like they talk about in the double slit experiment, that when there's an observer, it becomes a particle. When you remove the observer, it's a wave. This wave-particle duality. And the thing that struck me was, in that moment, the kind of an aha that I was getting was, I've always operated like I'm the observer. I'm always aligning to the external person or external authority and changing my trajectory based on what I think they see. Suddenly, what's been shifting for me as I step into my own sovereignty and my own independence is I'm becoming the observer. And then I suddenly got this image or thought before I'd left. When my husband and I were watching one of my favorite movies called Phenomenon, a guy that ends up developing all these capabilities and gifts that are beyond normal human capacity. But the movie is really heartwarming and beautiful. My husband, every time there'd be a touching, funny, or cute scene, I had my hand on his chest and he would kiss my hand. It was so heartwarming and beautiful, and not something that he normally does. It was just touching. My guides were bringing this memory. And then the thought that came into me was, the love was always there. I could always feel it. It was just really these moving memories and realizations of the beauty of the journey that I'm on. And I continued having these fascinating recollections and insights on where my journey is going to go in terms of inputs with the trailer. One of the things they were showing me was that I'm going to start tuning more to energy, like nature, myself, and others. And what they were showing me was that I was going to start finding resonant vibrational frequencies in individuals. And what they showed me was that because, I think I mentioned before, every trauma we have has a timeline. Every timeline has a frequency. Think of quantum superposition. Quantum system exists in multiple states at the same time until it's observed or measured. But they exist, these timelines. So all the traumas we have, our gifts and our dharma, our capacities, timelines that we have access to, are all in our field, are in our system. And then when we change frequency, when we get triggered and we go to a lower frequency for a trauma, we are in that particular timeline. But if you can read harmonics, if you can read the frequency, and the harmonic is about the vessel that it comes through. So the same note, it's like playing a piano versus a guitar. It's the same note, but sounds different. So that way, every note that comes through us will sound different because of these harmonics. And so if you can read the harmonics, you can really read exactly what's going on with a person. So one of these they showed me in the past was that part of the reason that kids on the telepathy tape can do medical diagnoses so perfectly because they can read these harmonics, these frequencies. And so they know exactly what's wrong with the person. And what they said is you're going to start being able to do that. So you'll be able to help someone, like it's a sound. And you'll be able to make that type, apparently, make that sound and help them match it so they can get to their resonant frequency. And some kind of attunement between them in their system and with the environment they're in. And Matthias de Stefano talked about this at one point when he was in the pyramid. He had groups of 12 that he was instructed to bring in. And he started humming. He got his own frequency in the space. And then he was able to get the group into a resonant frequency. And that's when he said magic started to happen. Light codes started coming in from other dimensions, and all kinds of interesting things. But essentially, they were showing me that I was going to be able to do this. And Jacob Collier, I went to a concert of his, absolutely amazing. where he has people, different parts of the group hum, or the audience, and then everyone sings together. And it was just really beautiful, very interactive experience. And they were showing me that I was going to be able to identify the resonant frequency of an individual and a group. So every group has this resonant frequency that takes them into a state of coherence. If they can hum that and come to that place, they go into that state of self-healing and coherence. And so essentially you can start to do this across the collective. So what they were showing me then was that I would be able to make these sounds. And I recently had a reading done that was showing me how it would be the way whales sing underwater, and their songs can go very far in the water. Kind of a similar thing they were showing me where the sound I was making was going through the air like water, and it was helping people hit resonant frequencies and collective healing at scale. And then, so it was like singing, but it wasn't like the usual singing. And it was coupled with what I saw earlier in a timeline before I went to Peru, where I was sending energy to a crowd, like hundreds of thousands of people, whatever, sending energy out. And if the waveform was moving to the crowd and healing, and then where it would get stuck because someone was blocked, there were all these techniques we were using to help them heal. So, for example, from me to the person, it would go to the path of least resistance, the people with the highest frequency, go to the person blocked, and then it would melt their knots or their sankharas, and then the waveform would keep moving. In another place, we were showing them how everyone around that person that's blocked would amplify their frequency, and then it would melt that person's knots or sankharas, and then again, the waveform would keep moving. And then all these hundreds of thousands of people started going out to their communities, organizations, and corporations, and doing the same thing we were doing to help heal across the planet. So peer-to-peer collective healing is what they were showing me. And anyway, so that was quite fun. And a lot of what they were showing was like all these different ways to scale what we do. So right now what we're doing is one-on-one, two-on-one healing. And they're showing us ways to accelerate past to self-actualization. And that includes everything, right? Another way they were showing me that's going to scale is, and I've shared it with you, is around bringing in like some type of intelligence that would be activated, leveraging capabilities like the telepathy tapes in the platform in a way that allows us to scale healing, which I'm just following the breadcrumbs, so we'll see what happens. But the other thing that they were showing me is that working with people that make immersive experiences, art installations, playful experiences, my own experience is about reliving my childhood, finding more childlike experience where play, experimentation, dance, singing, all these ways to play and be a kid. And that's what they're guiding me towards. So a lot of the people that are coming towards me now and in the program work, the cohort we're doing now, no coincidence, are people that work with kids or work with immersive experiences or play. And I can see little threads of where it's going. So they were showing me glimpses of that. It was very exciting and very fun and very playful. And I started, they even planted little seeds. For example, I started hearing the song A Whole New World from Aladdin. And it was talking about the new world that's emerging, going on a magic carpet ride, like playfulness and stepping out of every reality known into a world of magic and mystery, like I've done. They were showing me like the genie. Our higher self is like the genie that's trapped within. And if you learn how to release the genie, all your wishes can come true. This is like the journey that I'm on. So they were showing me all of these, like Harry Potter, how the muggles are in the 3D world, right? And we have the witches and wizards that are in 5D world, how there's truth to that story. And a lot of things that we think were fiction and only child's play are actually real magic and mystery. So I was just in so much awe, play, joy, and wonder in Vipassana. And what they were showing me was they were repeatedly doing this sequence of movements. And especially when they would send spheres of light to each of these, and it would be namaste in 3 places. It would be like the top, the forehead, and the heart. And I was looking at it later, and this is to like divine beings and the cosmos. Forehead is the teacher, the higher self, and the heart is recognizing the divine in other. And so they were doing this 3 times, and then my hands would go, this is compassion. So right at the heart center, I learned this from Gift of the Body, Jonathan Goldman wrote. If you hold your hands out here, surrender, compassion will come into your hands, and then they would basically do this, and I would feel it coming into my heart, and then my hands would open, and it would be love. So I thought initially it was like goodwill, compassion, and love. And they did this a lot over, and it was this humility that was asking for compassion. It seemed to be a theme with my higher self. Whenever she came in, she would do these like motions quite frequently as she was sending spheres. So there's something about stepping into the divine that has to do with humility and compassion and love, which was really beautiful to witness and experience. So that's what was going on until day 7. And then what started to happen after that was what was really jarring. Before they revealed it, like day 7 and day 8, I started feeling a lot of knots melting, especially in my head, my ear canals and my nasal cavity and teeth, my jaw, and my eye socket. I started feeling things melting. I wasn't sure why. I was just observing it. I started seeing it on day 8, and it really deepened on day 9 of 10. What they initially showed me, so this is a trigger warning for those of you that may not want to tune into disturbing trauma visualizations or information. They showed me an image of a baby. And at first I was just observing a baby in a bathtub and she's covered in bubbles of soap, foam. And then they showed me someone sexually assaulting her. And at first I'm like, why am I being shown this image? What is this? And I immediately heard from my higher self, if you don't look at this, we can't help you release it from the system. So I was like, okay, all right, look at it. I want to release this from the system. And I knew that there was some sexual trauma, and I'm in a deep meditative state, 10 days. And then I was like, who is doing this to me? And nothing immediately came. And then after a few minutes, I saw it was my uncle, and he was laughing and showing one of his friends, or it looked like he was showing someone. And then I was still in disbelief. And then they gave me this insight. They said, that's why you don't like the water. I don't like to go in ocean, pool, hot tubs. I don't even like taking showers unless I have to. And I've never really known why. And I was like, oh gosh, no wonder. So it's kind of stark, dark realization. And then they started showing me images when I was a little bit older, like when I was like 6 or 7. And the first thing they showed me was I was in a room. I was almost like looking at it from overhead. And I was trapped in a room. I was trying to get out. And it was in India. I could see my uncle there. And then they started showing me scenes. And really disturbing scenes that I was really struggling to believe at first. Past life, is it hallucination? Is it me just making stuff up? But then they started showing me patterns in my life that were correlated to the trauma, to the experience. And what they started to show me was that my uncle was an alcoholic who he would have friends over, drink and party all the time. And there was a lot of that whenever we visit. When I was young, and then certainly in the summers, and we were in Saudi Arabia, we visited for I think 3 or 4 summers. We visited India. And they showed me some scenes then. So him and a couple of his friends would come in and they would gang rape me. And they clued me into certain parts of the conversation. There was at one point, I heard him speaking, saying the reason we target this age range is because they can't get pregnant, they don't talk, and they're compliant. And the memory that came to me was, if you say anything, we're going to kill you. We're going to do this to other family members. So they showed me scenes, really disturbing scenes, where multiple people were trying to have sex with me. But one of the things that I heard from part of the conversation they tuned me into was that I heard my uncle say, this is my brother's daughter. We can't leave any evidence. A lot of that sexual assault was done orally. They were showing me like some of the scenes, and I was like, this can't, it's too surreal. I don't remember any of this. But then they showed me that nerve pain I got faced week before I left that I mentioned in the last video was the trauma coming to the surface. And I was like, and then as soon as I acknowledged it, I was like, oh. I started feeling sankara start melting in my face, in my jaw. And then they started showing me, reminding me, I had this oral fixation growing up. I was always wanting to drink stuff. My mouth was always dry. I wanted to chew gum. 2 days before I discovered this in Vipassana, my mouth started salivating like crazy. It was almost like the salivary gland that opened because they must have closed from the trauma. And I'd had this toothache for every so often for a year. And then in that conversation with my husband, it's when it amplified because it was like I cleared so much and I was stepping into sovereignty and came to the surface then, right? And as it started melting, like crazy melting in my face, it started moving to the back of my head. And I thought, why the back of the head? And then they showed me a scene where I started suffocating when they were doing this. And then one of the guys said, oh man, I got to be careful. I don't kill her. And then my uncle said, oh, I'm a doctor. Don't worry. We can always resuscitate her. And then they showed me scenes where I was suffocated to death. And then the next thing I knew, they resuscitated me. and woke me up and then continued. And, the trauma on the back of the head, then the amount of force they had to apply because I must have fought it before I passed out was so much that there was trauma on the back of the head. And so they spent a really long time just melting nodes on my head. And it was excruciatingly painful as all this was melting. And then what was interesting was before, and I forgot to mention, before I went to Vipassana, a couple days before I left, I had done a Sushumna clearings for a couple of people. And both of them, what was interesting and strange to me at the time was they both had, and I'm going top down, but they both had, I'm sorry, I'm like, need to recollect myself here. So they both had pain in their legs, IT band, knees, back of the knee, front of the knee. And it was weird because I've never had two people a couple days apart with the exact same kinds of pain. And both of them, when I came to the ground chakra, the first chakra, it was very blocked. And both of them, I couldn't resolve the pain. All these parts of their body started hurting, primarily in the leg. And I couldn't resolve it like every other Sushumna clearing that I'd done. So after an hour and a half, I'm like, I think we should pause. I don't think I have the capacity to heal this or clear it. And so I left that and came to Vipassana. And when I was in Vipassana, they had me go through, before they showed me all of this, they had me go through with Sushumna for myself. And I noticed my ground chakra was really blocked. And then they took me through yoga, really incredibly beautiful yoga sequences they started taking me through. It would be like I would move and I would end up in a perfect other position. It was like dance. It was like graceful movements. And I was in total awe of what my higher self was taking me through. But then they showed me how my IT band and my knees and my forearms were all blocked. They were all tight. So it was a match. And what they showed me was that everyone who's coming to me for the Sushumna clearing, there's no coincidence. There's no accident about who's arising. Basically, my healing journey. And they're taking me through deeper and deeper traumas. And I'm healing that through the reflection of the person that I'm working with. So as I'm clearing them, I'm also clearing me. And they're taking me to deeper and deeper trauma. And they were showing me that it's going to keep getting deeper and deeper until I can heal much more severe physical and mental illness, including people even with bipolar, schizophrenia, and those who hear voices. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, so I could feel all the tightness. And then when this trauma occurred and all these knots and cars started melting in my body, I went back to my room, and on my way back, I was still in shock, really, from how surreal and how dark what I'd been shown, and just like when I left the hole, I just remember seeing the stars and the moon and thinking it's so beautiful. And kind of the sadness of realizing that my childhood was robbed. I was robbed of my childhood with that experience, and why I remember nothing through sixth grade, and why I chased the grade so aggressively, and why I've always felt like I don't have inherent value. And why I sought it on the outside, why I feared intimacy, why I struggle to make friends, why I struggle in relationships, why I've hurt people in my life. How it was connected to my past life trauma that was shared with me from the second chakra. And amazingly, when I did it with that healer, like 4 or 5 years ago, she actually found the trauma in the fifth chakra, which is the jaw, which is the throat. But she said it's a sexual trauma. And so it was the second chakra that she went to and assumed it was attributed to. For those of you that weren't tuned into that one, it was a life where I was sold off as a child bride at the age of 6 to my uncle, who was 35, 40 or something. And when I wouldn't submit to sex, all the men in the family on that side, the in-laws, gang raped me and destroyed my uterus. And then after a couple of years, kicked me out. And it was dark, really dark. And I realized how trauma passes from past life epigenetically, how it passes through, how it affects emotional behavioral pattern. And when I came back to my room, they had me again go through Sushumna, and I noticed my ground chakra was much more clear. And then they took me through yoga, and all these knots were melting. My IT band, my knees, all of it melted. And when I came back, and I did one of these people again, I was able to then resolve the pain and clear it. So they were showing me so much about how trauma passes through the entire system. And I knew it was a gift, but the gift, it's like my higher self and I designed this life to go through these traumas, to develop the capacity and resources to move through it, and then to help others do the same. I know that's my journey. Man, it's a high price to pay for compassion. I realized suffering is a way to have compassion. I know when I would meet people who had sexual trauma, I would say, how come they're not over it? Why is it taking so long? And even when I discovered my trauma in a glimpse of it in North Carolina, I was a wreck for a day, but then I came to stillness and I thought, wow, there was hubris. I'm like, oh, I have so much capacity. I'm able to process, I don't know what was wrong with everyone else. This took me, when I got the images and I felt it in my body, how disturbing it was. And the thing that I remembered, there were scenes in movies that I'd seen that were really deeply disturbing to me. All these memories were now coming back to me. I couldn't explain it. I remember there was a scene in a movie where this guy, serial killer, would rape women and then strangle them. And then when they would die, he would resuscitate them and do all of that again over and over. And I remember being really deeply disturbed by that. And then I realized why. That's what happened to me. And then every time there'd be like gang rape scenes or even rape, again, I couldn't get out of my head for days. I would keep seeing the scene like a nightmare. And the part that's been really hard, when I got back, there'd be waves of sadness that would kick in. And I realized how people can move to suicidal ideation because thoughts that were coming in my head was like, God, there's that much cruelty for children, innocent children. There's that much evil in the world. What's even the point? Like coming to that place when I would fall into the fragment. Is there even goodness? And I would honor that and let tears flow and move through it and then come back to the higher self and realize how powerful it is for me to experience that, to survive it. And what I realized was I started beating myself up for always having the silver lining, all the narratives and storytelling and everything's awesome, right? And I started beating myself up. And wow, I tucked so much under the carpet and like with all that silver lining, and I never dealt with the trauma and the shame and the terror and sadness. And I came to this place of I'm so proud of myself for when I fell into the fragment. Part of me was like, I'm so proud of myself for having silver lining and having the narratives, because it's probably what allowed me to get through it, to focus all my energy on getting good grades and the external validation to survive. And so I just started seeing the trauma response, capacity, the vast intelligent system to help us move through the most traumatic, disturbing experiences. And then how the system is always trying to heal. It keeps repeating the scene of the crime, hoping that one day we will rewrite it and we will be able to observe it with equity and release it from the system. And I was being shown how to do that in such a brilliant and beautiful way. The way they titrate, and I realized that when I was in the psilocybin journey last February with Ayahuasca or Ayahuasca, and they took me to what I thought was ancestral trauma in my second chakra, and I was sobbing, and I was so much that I had to hold my body up. And I remember the shaman's daughter even came over and said, but she rarely left her seat. She came, a very powerful presence, sat on my mat and said that Mother Mary is here. Have compassion. That's her message. And it was like, I'm getting chills now, like the entire time before then when they were sending spheres of light to me, they kept coming to compassion. I was being moved to tears and to love because of all of the sheer gifts. So much beauty, so many gifts, so much humility is what it ground in my body. Humility. One thing I'll mention is the last meditation before I left. I was thinking about comfort, wanting comfort, and my husband holding me. And then I immediately thought, wow, it was so hard for him even to hear that I had sexual trauma, much less the details of it. And so I had this instant thought, like, I can't tell him. It's going to crush him. I have to do this myself. And I'm in this place of I'm utterly alone. And I started to cry in this meditation. And then I heard my higher self say, you hold you, we'll hold you. And I immediately got this beautiful image of a mama bear. It was almost an animation of a mama bear holding her cups, all her fragments. in love. And then my higher self like put their arms around me. And then our guide, or my guide, put their arms around me. And then this image of all my friends and family, and pretty soon the whole planet was like holding me. It was just this like beautiful, beautiful image. And then it was like all these fragments started to dissolve in the center. Mother and her cubs became one. I became whole. And then it was just this ping of love that just emanated into the universe, into the cosmos. It was just this beautiful, comforting message. Everything that I need is right here. Just so stunning, so beautiful. So I came back with that, and I was still moving through these waves, shock and sadness and terror, shame, fear. And I came back and I immediately shared it with my husband, and I was moved to tears, and it was a shock for him to hear it, to even try to digest it. He couldn't. And I realized sharing it with someone close, they didn't know what to say. They didn't know what to do. And at one point, I was trying to get some hot water, and he's a big fan of efficiency. So he timed it or something. I couldn't get hot water. I just lost it. It was a trigger for me. And I was like, can I get some creature comforts? I don't want to be freezing in my house. I can't even get hot water and warm house. And I just lost it. I'm trying to move through this. And can I just get some basic comfort? And he like immediately was there for me. He's like, I don't know what to say, what to do, and how to help you. I'm like, so while I'm drowning, you want me to teach you how to swim? When I moved to this really angry, you're so armored. You're so disconnected from yourself because you think the stuff that I'm doing is touchy-feely bullshit. This is where it matters. In my darkest hour, you can't support me. You can't even tune into what you're feeling, much less what I'm feeling. And he's just, tell me what to do. Tell me what I want to learn. I want to do this. And initially, I'm like, I'm not going to teach you. I'm not going to tell you. You got to figure this out. You figure it out. You're a smart guy. You investigate and like research and know everything about topics you get into. You figure it out. And then it was like this anger that came to the surface from that vulnerability. And then I was able to reground and calm with the tears. And then we started sharing. He became vulnerable and he shared his fears and how he felt the distance over the years and how we now understood it through the trauma. And it was so touching. It brought me to tears because I realized like I'd hurt him because of the trauma and because of all my fears and so on. And he was like, maybe we can start over and fall in love more deeply again. Do the things that like fun things together and find. I said, yes, we should do that. But I think we also need to go into darkness. If we don't have it, James Cotton talked about this, that if you don't have love maps for each other, how do I support you when you're down? Or how do you support me when I'm down? And when these things happen, we have no way, we increase distance. So we need these love maps of each other, understanding what are we feeling and what are we moving through and how do we want to be held and supported when we're down, when we're struggling, and because I'm like, I want to be held. I want to, and then he immediately was there for me. It was really sweet. It's been a journey. It's been an amazing, terrifying, awe-inspiring journey that I want to help others move through too. And the next journey I'm going to share in the next video, in which when I was the journey weekend, and I experienced amazing experience. And I also got more depth, more darkness that happened in my childhood. So I'll share that. Thank you so much.